Hey, Dave Stallman here, and we're starting a new unit about data analysis. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about data presentation. And basically, the idea is that some graphs are good and some graphs are bad. And depending on your purposes, you may want to do a really good graph to get your point across, or you may want to do a bad graph to try and convince somebody of your opinion, even though the data may not support that opinion. Here's some examples. So here's an example of a graph where you see the average starting salary in dollars per hour for 2 years. And so maybe you're at a job fair and a company says, hey, you know what? You should come work for us because if you look, our salaries doubled from 2002 to 2004, and that's going to be really good for you. Because if you look at the height of these bars, the height doubled. But what's nefarious about this graph is the units on the y-axis. If they were actually to scale, going from 0 up to 12, you would see that, yes, the salaries went up from $2 per hour to $12 per hour, which is a pretty good increase, but it certainly didn't double. The only reason it looks like it doubled is because the y-axis is changed. All right, here's another one. You might have a financial advisor that says, hey, you need to really save some money with us for your retirement, because if you look at the history here in the 1960s, the savings rate was 6.6%, and then look, in the 70s it went way up, and in the 80s it went down, and 90s it went down to, there's hardly any savings there at all compared to these other years. And if you look at your generation now, it's even less. Well, again, what this is showing is these bars are really not to scale, and so it makes this 1990s look really, really small, when in fact it's not that much smaller than these other ones. So if you're trying to get a point across that the data doesn't support, you can change the way the graphs look. So this is a really good table of data, and here's the things that make the table good. It's got a title up here that tells exactly what the table is about. It has a source at the bottom which tells you where the data comes from. And then it's got each of these categories listed out with a total, and it gives two key things here. It gives the actual number of persons involved, and then it gives the percent of each category. So the percent really tells you how the different categories relate to each other, and the number of persons involved tells you the actual quantity that were involved. So this is ideal. And if you can include all this information in a graph as well, that'll make a good graph. So to reiterate, counts give you the actual number of people, rates give you the percent of people, and that is what makes a graph like this, or a table like this, really good. Okay, now distribution is a vocabulary, that word that tells you how the data is spread out. From min to max, as well as how it's spread out into different categories. Okay, and the way that you can show the distribution, one really good way is with a pie chart. And so, in this case, you can see like the different levels of education. And even without the percents on here, it's very easy to see, based on the size of the pie pieces, how the different categories relate to each other. The other way that you can show this same type of data is with a bar chart. And again, the heights of the bars tell you how each of the categories are related to one another. So those are two very good ways to show how data is distributed amongst categories. Now, um, as it turns out, there is categorical variables and quantitative variables. And so categorical variables are things that fall into categories, like amount of education or the color of cars that are produced, that sort of thing. Whereas a quantitative variable are things that take a numerical or a number value. So how much money is spent on groceries, for example, or what are the starting salaries for engineers out of college? Those would be quantitative. Now, another way that data can be presented poorly in a graph is by organization. Now, this is from a number of years ago, but it gives you the taxes as a percent of gross domestic product for a number of different countries. And if you wanted to look at this and say, what's the third highest taxed country? It's like, well, how do you find it? It's really hard to do. Now, if you said, what's the taxes in Germany, you could go across in alphabetical order and find their tax rates. So this would be, if you're looking by country, this would be a good way to do it. But if you wanted to find it by who's taxed the highest and who's taxed the lowest, well, then you would want to put them in order by the tax percentage instead of alphabetical order by country. So those are another couple of ways that data can be presented to show advantage one way or the other. All right, well, that's enough. Here's an assignment. It's not too big, but there's some reading involved and a few problems. So if you would do that, you will be in great shape.